Well, I think in terms of reflecting on life, that friendships are mightily important. And there's a bit of a risk in talking about friends because invariably there will be some key personalities that I won't mention or will have overlooked. But I want to single out a few. Very important was the in-depth friendship I had with my mother and father and my two brothers, David and Mark. There are hundreds and hundreds of letters received from my mom and dad and my brothers over the decades that we interacted. We were located in different places. My parents on the south coast of Oregon, my brother David living in Corvallis and Salem in his law practice in Albany, and my brother Mark spending much of his adult life in Boston area where he'd gone to MIT and Harvard. Those were really important and nurturing family relationships and friendships. There were also some really invaluable teaching colleagues at Lewis and Clark College. In particular, I team taught with three different faculty members. First with Ed Florance, a botanist and field biologist with whom I had several enjoyable field course expeditions in summer session in the late 70s, early 1980s. And then team teaching experiences in the core program at Lewis and Clark with John Callahan and Curtis Johnson. John, an English professor, and Curtis, a Pamplin professor of political science, were really close colleagues and confidants of mine. I valued their counsel. I was thrilled with the opportunity to team teach with them, and their friendship over the decades has been enduring and very meaningful. Also, through Lewis and Clark College, I team taught with Ian Adams, a visiting professor from Scotland in the public administration programs. I interacted regularly with Don Balmer in political science and with John Bates early in my career, a very significant and important figure teaching business and economics, and later chairman of the board of trustees at Lewis and Clark. There was another round of friendships as well. I became, as a college student, close to my second cousin, Bjorn Gauffin, who lived in Stockholm, Sweden. And in time, after lots of letter exchanges, I got to know Victor Gauffin, one of his 6 sons. Victor has twice visited us in the United States. I hear regularly from cousin Victor via email, and Patty and I have visited with him and his brothers in Stockholm. Another important connections were my first cousins, Jeffrey and Douglas Giles from Bandon, Oregon, both pursuing careers in business and in logging and lumbering. Their friendship has meant a lot to me, as that with my cousin Stephen Beckham of Canby, Oregon. That was always an interesting name coincidence. Stephen was my brother David's roommate at Oregon State, and he has twin brothers named Dow and Decker Beckham. So that was an overlap of names and friendships. And my cousin Richard C. Adamson, a lawyer and judge at Shelton, Washington. Those were critical ties and people with whom I've shared dozens and dozens of letters. Now, friends. I think basic among those would be Brian and Suzanne Waechter-Wilks of Middelhausen, France. Suzanne is my wife Patty's cousin, distant cousin, but cousin nonetheless. We met Brian and Suzanne in France in 1970 in a very fortuitous way. Patty had a series of letters written by her great-great-grandfather, George Reeb, to his daughter who lived in Pennsylvania. Those letters in German I got translated into English through my efforts and those of a colleague at Linfield College. And in 1970, we traveled to Alsace to visit the villages where those letters were written. It happened that eventually we pulled up into the square of the village of Mittelhausen. I happened to park right in front of the house that was our target accidentally. I knocked on the door and introduced myself and tried to explain in as good a German as I could do in Alsatian France that I was a history professor and that I believed that my wife and her mother, who were in the car, were relatives of George or Jacques Waechter. Mrs. Waechter had significant doubts about this. And in the midst of the great and animated exchange between Jacques and his wife and myself in the entryway, a young couple came bounding down the stairway and said, "Hey, what's going on here?" It was daughter Suzanne, who'd majored in English at the Sorbonne, and her British husband, Brian Wilkes, a graduate of Oxford University, who were then teaching in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, but happened that week to be visiting her parents in France with their children. That began a 55-year or more than 5-decade close friendship with Brian and Suzanne. We've traveled together to Italy. We've traveled in Eastern France. They have many times visited us in Oregon, as have their adult children, who most recently have lived in The Hague and in Florence, Italy. So that is an international collection, a connection that has been very important to Patty and myself. Another friendship was that forged starting in 1968 with Gordon Carl Bjork and his wife, Susan. Gordon was president of Linfield College, and he extended the invitation to me to join the faculty, which I did in 1969. The Bjorks have been steadfast friends for more than 50 years. They were at the hospital when Andrew and Anne-Marie were born in McMinnville. We have watched their 4 children grow up. We know their 10 grandchildren. They are remarkable friends who for the last 2 decades have lived in retirement in Santa Barbara after they left their positions at Claremont McKenna and Pomona colleges in Southern California. Another very important friendship has been that with Michael Mooney, who was president of Lewis and Clark College from 1990 to 2003. Michael came to Oregon from his post as vice provost of Columbia University, and we very quickly became very good friends. It was my joy to work with Mike on fundraising and currying relationships with friends and alumni of the college. In 1998, I was teaching in East Africa, and wonderfully, in the 8th week of the expedition, Mike showed up to join us to camp out for a week in the highlands of the interior of Kenya. He brought copies of the local newspaper, dried apricots, and updates from my family in Oregon. Mike and I team taught on seminars together on the Lolo Trail and also at Monticello, doing the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial. Mike aided and abetted my career in remarkable ways, particularly in helping me be named the first Pamplin Professor of History and endowed chair at Lewis and Clark College. And during his tenure as president, I wrote and the college published 2 books, Lewis and Clark College, which was an overview history of the institution, and the literature of the Lewis and Clark expedition, published during the bicentennial. Another really important lifelong friendship has been with Clay Strauss Jenkinson. Clay, like Jordan Bjork, a mutual friend of both of ours, was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. Clay is a humanist extraordinaire. He has traveled the nation lecturing, teaching, and writing. We met each other in San Francisco at a humanities conference in 1989 and immediately became friends. Clay was at that period teaching at Claremont McKenna, where he knew the Bjorks in Southern California. Clay is responsible for my appointment to the board of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library. We have team taught for the Colorado Committee for the Humanities. We have team taught for Lewis and Clark College for 3 years during the Expedition Bicentennial. Clay is the author of many books, including The Character of Meriwether Lewis, essays about North Dakota, and essays about place in American environmentalism. He's also the host of the Thomas Jefferson Radio Hour. He is a role player, an actor. He can be Meriwether Lewis in buckskins. He can be Thomas Jefferson in evening dress. He plays the role of Robert Oppenheimer. He is also a highly successful role player of John Wesley Powell, explorer of the American West and the Grand Canyon of the Colorado. It's been my pleasure on several occasions to be the host of programs introducing Clay, but most of all, we exchange lively letters over and over again, even though he lives in Bismarck and I live in Lake Oswego. There are also enduring friendships with former students. One of those for more than nearly 5 decades has been with Jeff Ray of Boise, Idaho, who put together this video autobiography and with great patience has served as the editor and questioner to drive my recollections. And every year for decades, Jeff has sent the Beckhams a 50-pound box of Walla Walla sweet onions from his home country up on the Columbia Plateau. A really wonderful event. Other former students include Tod Burton, businessman, researcher, also a graduate student of Bjork at Claremont. Tod was one of my undergraduate students at Lewis and Clark. Another, Christopher Friday, who became a professor. He earned his PhD at UCLA in history with some of my mentors, and for more than 30 years has taught at Western Washington University in Bellingham. My former research assistant, David Adams, who majored in philosophy, earned his PhD at the University of Hawaii, and has written and traveled the world and is founder of the off-campus educational programs called Island Ecology. Stefan Aumack, my sidekick in many adventures, was my research assistant in history in the early 1990s, was the outfitter for the program I taught in East Africa in 1998. Stefan also accompanied us on the seminars on the Lolo Trail through the Bitterroots in Idaho. He and his wife, Amy, live on Fall Creek near Eugene, Oregon, where for nearly 20 years he's been the principal of a high school in the Eugene district. One other of a former student is the rock classical violinist, Aaron Meyer. Aaron has entertained us. He's entertained our friends. He and his father have given concerts in the living room of our home at Nesquin. And several times it's been my pleasure and honor to introduce Aaron at his holiday concerts that have been held in Portland for the last 2 decades. Aaron is a star performer, and we've had the joy of working together in special benefits for Lewis and Clark College. And he's also played his fiddle with wonderful success at events at the Beckham Estate Vineyard. 2 other longtime associates that I want to mention as well that are really important in my life. One of them is attorney Dennis J. Whittlesey of Washington, D.C., with whom I worked on more than 20 litigation matters involving Native American tribes. Dennis has been a true friend and wonderful colleague as we've brainstormed and problem solved and documented and litigated issues. And Dennis had the trust to take me as his expert witness inside the bar of the courtroom and to sit beside him to write questions during interrogation as well as during deposition. I felt, and many times I was attending law school firsthand and working in the courtroom and in deposition with Attorney Whittlesey. Another person also important is Dr. Charles G. Deridder. Chuck was the Director of Educational Programming and Career Development for the Regional Office of the U.S. Forest Service for the Pacific Northwest. Chuck persuaded me to embark on numerous seminars, in fact, more than 30 of them field-based, where we traveled to Prudhoe Bay, we traveled to Southeast Alaska, the Rio Grande Valley, we studied the farm crisis in Iowa. We were all over the United States together, usually with 15 to 18 federal employees, addressing issues close up. Chuck Deridder was a can-do-it person who really understood the value of field-based learning and stepping into the resource and learning from that. These are some of the special friendships that come to mind. These are people that helped shape my life and career. They have been enduring correspondence, and they're well documented in the archival files off my office.